Do I need to put a spotlight or something, or I can proceed? Or
I've already done that.
okay, fine. Okay, so wow, I don't know where to start, man, because I think I'll maybe pick up on something that you said. You spoke about shy, socially awkward introvert. So I guess let me tell you the story of this boy who would go to any relative's place, any friend's house, and would go straight to the book corner. I celebrated a birthday in pandemic this year, as I can imagine a lot of us had, and my family, they collected messages from people and relatives, and everybody had the same thing to say. He would come, go straight to the books corner, and not speak to anyone. And for the longest time, I think books have been something that have shaped my life, in a lot of ways. And in some ways, I find that a lot of it is actually happening in hindsight. It takes a while sometimes to figure things out. You spoke about the cartwheel. I can say books sometimes can literally turn your very thinking upside down. Can turn around the way you look at the world, in fact. And if people can relate to a book, I don't know if a lot of us are book readers here, and if you can relate to this feeling of if this person likes the same book or says something about a book that made a lot of impact, it's like how he said, right, that I think I know you from someplace, but I'm not able to figure out exactly what. And I think that's what being, a fan of the same book feels like. That I don't know you, and yet in some ways I feel like I know you. Now, of course, we had a lot of exchanges, Abu and I, because he wanted me to have a formal presentation. What is the theme? And I was like, I have no idea. Okay, it's something that I try to figure out. And I know it makes his life very miserable. I'm hoping this session will take away, hopefully, some of his misery. I will hopefully try to do justice to some of the stress that I've given him. So I would like to start with, if I can just explore sharing the screen, and just give me one moment. Okay. Just give me 1 second. Yeah. Okay, guys, is it visible? Can you see it? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. I'm presuming only the PowerPoint is showing and nothing else at this point of time. Okay, because I think that is the biggest fear that most people have, sharing screens in this new world that we're living in. So, I was wondering how to structure this, how to go about it. Should I go from, what impacted me in childhood, or should I go with something more recent? So I had put out something recently. It was on this book called, I'm sure a lot of you might have heard of it, if not read it. So this is a book called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. And I thought I'll start with something more recent because it's allowed me to connect a lot of dots. I'd put up a small review of this book, and one of the reasons why I would say it changed my life is because for the longest time, as somebody who's been through different things, I've done a mix of things, been laid off a couple of times, done a corporate career, then comedy, art. To me, it felt like there are patterns in things, that we are often stuck at a very individual level. We are evaluating our relationships with people at a very individual level, as what is my relationship with my family, with my employer, with my friends. And sometimes those biases can prevent us from seeing what is a broader trend in how humanity works, because a lot of the challenges that we face, and especially in this year of all years, where the whole of humanity is going through a similar sort of crisis, I think it's very important to understand how the human race as a whole worked, how it has evolved. And this is a question that used to blow my mind for the longest time. I kept looking for the answer, and I think here's somebody who finally managed to answer that. And one of the specific concepts that blew my mind is about groups. And there's a video that I will share later on in the chat if anybody wants to see it. It talks about that the reason the human race has progressed is not because we're the most intelligent or we have opposable thumbs, but it's because we have the ability to work in extremely large groups. There is no other species in nature that is able to work in the sheer size of the groups that we can. So that brings us to the next question. Then how is it, okay, I mean, maybe, 100 antelopes can get together, maybe 500 lions can also get together in a herd or a pride, whatever is the collective noun. But how is it that millions of people come together, whether it's a religious movement or an art movement, or come together to form a nation? Because we do know, right, in most cases, boundaries, whether national or otherwise, are usually in the mind. And this is the concept that absolutely blew my mind, where he said the reason we are able to do that is because humans have the unique ability to believe in myths. we can believe in concepts in the mind, which are not necessarily physically manifested, right? So it could be the concept of the nation, a concept of a religion, the concept of money, currency, even a corporation, right? We say Microsoft hired me, or, we say TikTok hired me, which is not something you want to put on your CV today, but still, it's because these are fictional entities, and yet we as human beings are able to believe them as real flesh and blood things. And that is what allows us to come together. And that is also the source of our progress, but also the source of a lot of our misery. And to me, I felt this was something very important to understand, because seeing this pattern of the human race started explaining a lot of things that have happened in my life, in the way I've dealt with people, the way people have reacted to certain things. Suddenly, I was able to see things a little bit more objectively. I was no longer looking at this person is doing something good or something bad, or this group is doing something good or something bad. I was able to see it as patterns of this is how humanity behaves in a certain way in certain conditions. And I think just these two, the book gets into a lot of concepts. So, I don't have too much time to elaborate specifically on this book. But the reason I'm speaking about it is because it absolutely allowed me to see patterns. So what it does as a personal level is it allows you to stop being angry at a lot of things, because now you can see why people are behaving in a certain way. And that in some ways allows you to come up maybe with a better solution also to counter it. And, today is perhaps a good day. There is something that I like to talk about. It's called the hegemony of groups, group thinking. A lot of our challenges today are because of group thinking. We'll often do what the group is saying, what the group is doing, what trends is, whatever the group is trending. And to me, I feel that is one of the biggest challenges, for growth as a human being, whether it's personal, professional, or even emotional or spiritual. To me, it feels like if we can move away from that a little bit, it can liberate us in a lot of ways. And this book explained how groups work together, so that then you can understand also how to be part of a group and yet not become lost in that group completely, and that could apply to anything, for that matter. We have a lot of toastmasters here. So how to be a part of this group, enrich it, learn from it, and yet at the same time, not necessarily get completely ensconced in that identity, So that is one of the reasons why I spoke about this book as being something that changes my life. But there was a period before this. Sapiens is something I discovered fairly recently. So just to give you a little context, in the 10th standard, I had scored the highest marks in English. So there was a scholarship for that, for scoring the highest in English. There was also another scholarship for lover of English literature, which by default was given to the guy who scored the highest in English. I have never understood that logic. You could hate English literature and still score the highest in English, but I'm not complaining. Another fun fact, in the description of the scholarship, they used to show it in that school calendar book. And I was like, I want to win this. And in there, it was written that the winner will get a certificate, gift certificate of, book coupons, I think, for Strand Bookstall. And it said the winner will get a rotating trophy. Now, guys, this is an all truth I'm telling you. I'm not making this up. I genuinely thought rotating trophy will be this really cool thing that rotates. I honestly, genuinely thought that. Okay, so when I found out that I have to return it immediately after collecting it, I insisted that I'll get to keep the trophy for at least one day. So there is a photo of me in, let's just say not exactly the most describable clothes, but posing with that trophy. But what was important for that is, I was able to buy books, because I remember it was a decent amount back then in those days, 2,000-3,000 or something. There's so many books that as a student you would not even think of buying, those expensive books. I'm talking about a world before Amazon, Kindle, all of that. And that money allowed me to buy certain books which had a very path-breaking impact, and that is the next book that I like to talk about. It's called The Grand Acquisitors. Okay, there was this period in my life when I knew that I wanted to go beyond the Grishams and the Arthur Haleys, which of course are a great way of shaping up our study, our reading. But I felt I wanted something more to understand how the world works, how history and culture, how everything shaped up. This book is extremely important for me because it talks about how nobody in history is actually innocent. Today, we often like to paint narratives as one group did something and the other group suffered. This book rather actually, helps to dispel that and explains clearly that nobody in history is really innocent. When it traces back, which means when we try to look at retribution as a way of redemption, this book tells you why that would not be correct to do. And I'm really glad that, I had the fortune of reading these books at an early age. When internet and a lot of propaganda came along, I was able to not get sucked into it precisely because I had the fortune of reading books like this. So this one, I did not have the copy. There was another book, I remember this was like, again, it's upside down for some reason. So this is called Comrades, The Rise and Fall of World Communism. This book was $1,800 or something like that. Okay. And even at 50% off, it was 900. I would have never dreamt of buying that book if I didn't have that scholarship money. And this book again helped to save me in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of propaganda. Guys, I don't want to have any political disagreements. I'm just sharing my views. That's all I'm saying. Having read this book at a very early age, when propaganda came my way much later in the comedy circuit or online, I was able to dissociate from it because I had the fortune of reading a book like this at a much early age. And then things got a little deeper. So there's a book, which I read somewhere in, when I was in Saudi Arabia on a project. And this book is called Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. I cannot even describe how much this has helped to shape and define my life. There's like path-breaking, while it's not specifically from the novel, there's a quote by Ayn Rand that says, before saying I love you, you first have to get the I right. And that's what her school of thinking is all about. It's all about not letting false guilt, of groups get to you, of developing as an individual and developing and pushing yourself as the highest ideal of mankind. And I think this book has fundamentally defined the way I've shaped and helped to save me in a lot of ways, from challenges, from struggles, from people who will try to throw unearned guilt your way. I think this book did it. And this book is, however, a precursor to a book that I'd read much earlier, which is The Fountainhead. And this book also has an emotional resonance for me because my late father, he had left a copy of The Fountainhead. It was there, and I'd picked it up and I had sort of left it, but eventually I did pick it up and I finished reading it. And I would say it transformed the way I thought about a lot of things. And well, I will not get into details here. Certain things happened in the last couple of years. And I think this book literally saved my life. In some ways, I've seen the protagonists of both Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead. I've seen myself play that role, in the last few years. And at a very core level, these books connected with me. Along similar vein is this next book. It's called The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. It's a very dark and depressing book, but it has some very, very, very powerful narratives. Again, it brings us to that fundamental question of, often you think a certain number of people are dependent on you and helpless. And then there's a dramatic, I don't want to give away too much, from the book. And there's a dramatic transformation. And suddenly a lot of assumptions that the protagonist had are proven to be, shockingly wrong, and also depressingly so. But there are some very, very powerful learnings from this book in terms of, again, not taking unearned guilt, not making presumptions about other people. And often you'll be surprised that you might be living in a certain ecosystem and realize that a lot of it was false. If I would say there's one thing that books can do, it can liberate you from the false realities that group thinking can do, if you read the right kind of books. Because group thinking can often subjugate us. And today with social media and newsfeed, we're being assaulted from so many directions. It is very difficult to form an individual mode of thinking. If you question something, you're criticized. But a book cannot leave abusive comments on your YouTube channel like a lot of comedians get, if you know what I'm saying, right? A book does not judge you. A book allows you to absorb and take away from it whatever you feel like, right? It stays in that kind of perspective. So that's one of the reasons why this book has been, very, very important for me. And I would say in this year especially, I've harked back to this book in many ways, and at a very personal level, it's resonated with me. It is a depressing book, so if you feel a dark genre can make you sad, maybe avoidable. But if you feel there's something that can cause a shift in the way you think, and I can tell you this much from personal experience, I read these books in my 20s, many of them, some of them just after passing out of school, some when I came back from B school, and again was living that socially awkward introvert life. I didn't have too many friends post B school. And somewhere I sought solace in these books. And I think that's what changed a lot of things for me. I did not realize the significance of what I was absorbing from these books back then. It's only years later, after the kind of journey that my life has taken, that I'm realizing how much these books shaped my thinking, not just then, but now, And in fact, in those days, I remember my first job was with Prudential, and I used to sit in Hiranandani in Powai. There's a bookstore there. And I finished so many books like George Orwell's 1984. And I was looking on the internet, and this is the world before Facebook, right? Pure, just Google searches about which are the next level books, high quality literature to read. And one of the books that came up, and it comes from the school of existentialism. The author was Albert Camus, and this book is called The Stranger. Also known as The Outsider in the French translation. The original is in French, I believe. So it's known as both The Stranger and The Outsider. Just to give you a very quick brief of the plot, a man is hanged because he does not cry at his mother's funeral. That is the plot of this book. And to me, in hindsight, it's been a representation again of how society can crucify somebody based purely on perceptions. We can, and today, in the world of social media, it has become so much easier and hence so much more dangerous. Which is why it's again very, very important to first end, most important thing is to not end up in self-crucifixion. You can only fight the world if you're not crucified yourself first. And a lot of these books, I think, in some ways, help to save you from doing that. The opening line of this book is, "Mother died today." Or maybe it was yesterday. It's a beautiful and a haunting, a lot of existentialists have in fact hung on to that one line. There is, however, an article in the New Yorker that says that this line has been misinterpreted in some ways, that lost in translation, because it sounds very, very, mechanical as somebody who has no feeling when he says "mother died today." But the actual original lines in French, which were lost in translation, was something to the lines of "maman died today." And maman is a more affectionate term, which means somewhere we've lost in translation, and it changes the whole meaning of the book. We've lost an essence of translation. So when we are reading translated works also, it's very important to realize that sometimes we might be missing out on a lot of deeper things, so which is also a reason why it may be a great idea to explore learning languages, because if you can consume content in the original language and intent at which it was written, I think there's much more richness. Of course, the fact that this book has been translated into so many languages means it was such an amazing book that even with the loss of translation, it is certainly worth reading. Like, those who watch Japanese anime, a lot of those are brilliant. I just feel sad sometimes that, I don't know Japanese and I wish I did, because I have a feeling there's much more deeper meanings and reflections of Japanese society and feelings that, the creators are trying to put, which maybe are getting lost in translation a little bit. I'm hoping that over time, if not learning a language, maybe AI and automatic language translators can help us to discover a much wider world of literature which is out there, Now, these are books that, I would say shaped and changed my life. And I guess some of this is getting a little bit dark and maybe it feels a little depressing. So I'm going to share another book with you. Okay. I think I've unfortunately not put the, slogan here for some reason. So this book is called America's Secret War. Okay. And the background is this book. Okay. This book is something that, when my mother was in the hospital in 2000, nothing serious. Okay. It was like a scheduled surgery. And, I was the only one there. So I was out roaming on the streets, looking for something to do when I had a break in the middle, And I went into a bookstore and I picked up this book. And it was about, a company called Stratfor and a gentleman called George Friedman. And he had, made strategic forecasts about what is America doing in Iraq. And he ran a company called Stratfor, which does strategic geopolitical forecasting. So back then, I think I was around 24 or something. I had this idea that I can run a similar company in India. I was inspired by that book. And I started reaching out to sources in intelligence, wherever I could find them. I met somebody who used to, work in BSF, the Border Security Force. I met somebody who was in IB. I met somebody who used to be an ex-RAW person. And I picked up the phone and I reached out to this company and I made a pitch to them that I can be your Indian arm, And we exchanged a series of emails also between us. Now, guys, here is the kicker. The reason I'm sharing this story with you, if some of you have heard of WikiLeaks, WikiLeaks picked up some of those emails because they were going after Stratfor. And believe it or not, if you Google my name and WikiLeaks, I am India's entry into WikiLeaks. And that all happened because of reading this book. It's a little hard to explain the context, but I can tell you this much, that I am proof that WikiLeaks journalism is not foolproof. Because whatever they put in that story, they never even bothered to reach out to me or verify or anything. I found it very hilarious. You will find it if you Google it. So to me, the reason I'm talking about is that sometimes a book can have a very dramatic impact on your life and take you on journeys that you cannot imagine. I don't want this to be very heavy also, so I want to share something light as well. Okay, so for example, this book. Okay, this book I picked it up In fact, I would say an ex-girlfriend picked it up when we were still dating. This was at the Crossword bookstore at Kemp's Corner. Okay, it's called Look Who's Back. So one is, it's a very light-hearted take on what if Hitler had not died but actually comes back 70 years later, having no clue at all. And the world does not even believe this is the real Hitler. It's hilarious, it's dark, it's there on Netflix as well. A pretty dark comedy in some ways. All the reasons I remember this is because we were picking out this book, and for some reason, I don't know why, there was a spontaneous burst of emotion, and I just kissed my girlfriend in a bookstore. And I remember she was laughing and wondering what I'm doing. Of course, today, if you do it in COVID times, you will get arrested for endangering public health. But back then, I felt that, whenever I look at this book, it reminds me of that light-hearted memory that I had with this person. In fact, another book that next girlfriend gave me is this one. It's Love All the People by Bill Hicks, one of the most amazing comedians of our time. He was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. And there's a lot that I've learned from this book in terms of, as a comedian, I can tell you one thing, his material is there in written form, and you will see a lot of it keeps repeating. But when you read the fifth iteration, you will notice he has changed one punchline. Because that's how comedy grows. You keep working on the same set over and over and over, and then one punchline changes, and then a tag changes. And then over a period of time, like Ship of Theseus, your 30 minutes in a period of year has become 30 new minutes, and you don't even realize when you've gone from the old to the new. I just want to leave you with one last thought before we get into the question answer, because I understand we're short of time. If you want to know how books can sometimes leave you with the most poignant thing, because I was doing this series on Sapiens, I wanted to do a similar, I thought something funny on a book also. This is Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor. And this was lying in my bookcase, and then what happened? Guys, I picked this book up, this was in my late father's bookcase. And when I opened it, I found that there were some clippings that my late father had left behind, with messages like, act before it becomes too late. Choice determines your life's fortunes. Don't quit, persist, and be patient. And I was not expecting this. And it came to me at a time in my life when I really needed it. So in some ways, it felt like the book had allowed me to communicate with my father from the beyond. And because of that, I ended up putting this tweet, which is the last slide that I have, if you guys can see it. So guys, that's it from me.
Hey, hi, Vikram, Munish here. They typically say that when people do comedy, there is a lot of tragedy in their life. Not that I want to point that out, but it's just you recommended those books that are a bit on a darker side, as you said. So is that a fact, like according to you? What do you think?
Wow. I guess it is, I would say, fairly maybe true to a fair extent. I would say that it is. I would say that if I were to start, putting down a life journey, it has had some pretty hair-raising, jumps and so I would just say, when people say, like they get offended at something, I just want to say, I will tell you this much. Everything is. I was just telling this to a toastmaster. In fact, he was chatting with me in the afternoon. And I told him the same thing, that remember one thing, everything will always be funny. Now, again, it might sound dark. So, like when my father, when so he had a hemorrhage in around 2000, I think, 12 or something like that. And, he was forgetting things in his memory. And we were asking him, my mom and I, we were asking him, the doctor told us, ask him questions. And we asked him for the nephew's name, do you remember? And he gave a name, Ambuj. Okay, it's a name we've never heard. And I'll be honest, Manish, we laughed. We both did. It does not mean, of course, that, we were happy at what was happening, but it was funny. In that moment, it was funny. We did laugh at it. It does not mean that, of course, we were happy at what was happening or we were insensitive to it. But everything is funny in that moment, in some ways or the other. I think it is like I do jokes about it, and I often talk about one of the questions. We would ask him, okay, dad, pura, what is ghar ka pura address kya hai? What is your full name? And dad, will kahan pe rakhi? Is, one of the questions that we would often ask, something like that. And I do think humor in some ways, we say comedy is truth. And maybe where a lot of viewers might miss out is that the truth is more than just the joke that you're listening to. Like it's the same with books. For example, what people take away, what people interpret from them. So now whether to describe, that have I seen a tragic life, I don't know what to say. Sure, I've seen a fair amount of challenges and struggles, no doubt, as I presume a lot of people have, in their own way. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why books have been a very important, I would say, a part of my life. And because in your grief, in the tragedies, that you face in life, sometimes we can get very caught up in that thing, and it can subsume you completely. I think books allow you to see a much wider world that is out there, and that's what gives you hope, to keep going. That this tragedy that you're going through it's never going to be the one that defines who you are. It's always going to be what you did with it, how you addressed it, how you dealt with it. And I think books are a powerful way, in fact, I think, of dealing with something like that. So I wanted to show you guys something. For example, this one here. Okay, this is a book again. Now the weirdest thing is everything is upside down in this mirror image thing. Okay, so this is called M and the Big Whom. Okay, this is written by Jerry Pinto. Okay, an author who's, I think this one is about his mother, who had bipolar. And so when my father was diagnosed with bipolar, it was a very new thing there. Nobody knew. I think we had no idea what this thing is. We were still trying to figure it out, and it's like we were looking for something. And then I remember when I came across this book and I picked it up and I read it, and there are funny moments in it. They might be dark, but a lot of them are funny. They are funny, to be very honest. And I think that's what allows us to keep a lighter side of things. I mean, for example, I got laid off in 2009, and I do a lot of jokes about it now. And the thing is, I didn't realize something is funny, or like I used to joke about how the company that I got laid off from, I performed for the same audience 6 years later. And to me, that's a very matter of fact thing. It happened. But when I did that at a storytelling event for Taper Tale, there was this applause from the audience, and I realized, okay, they think this is something very funny or significant. So a lot of times you will discover something is funny, I think, in hindsight. Just like funny is something. So like when we say comedy, it's the person who's in the situation is not able to see that it's funny, because to them it feels like this is normal. As the same with tragedy, I think the person who is experiencing it, they are just doing what it takes to survive and to thrive and to get out of it, and either to protect themselves. I don't think they realize this is the tragedy. To them it's a matter of fact, like कि हाँ आज finance ने invoice नहीं clear किया, ठीक है. It's pretty much the same thing. And that's why we have artists, right? Because artists take those emotions and those expressions that we have and give them light. And that's why I say don't take artists too seriously, because man, hum log to har emotion ko exaggerate karte hain. Like if you don't get your payment, or travel reimbursement from finance, you'll be like, theek hai, nahi aaya. An artist will be like, this is a gross violation of my sovereignty. Here is my follow-up letter written in my own blood, and all this. That's not a way to live. It's good to have that catharsis occasionally, but otherwise we have to live sane lives, because we do live in a civilized, and as I believe somebody else also spoke about it, right, Arushi, we are living in a group, right? So a lot of times the emotions that we have, the purity of it, we do restrain them, but we have found ways like art and all to express. And I think in some ways books allow us to read what somebody else has already expressed, and social media allows us to find there are so many other people who feel the same way. And I think that's how that whole circle of life sort of completes. And thank you for coming for my TEDx talk.